We actually want to go to an interview here with someone we've had on the show before, Jamil Jaffer. He is the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute. Obviously, you've got great expertise when it comes to this. What we're seeing now, as we were mentioning, I mean, considering the time we're in this country, both domestically and internationally, given what's going on in Afghanistan, what goes through your mind watching these images unfold on Capitol Hill?
The most important thing is making sure that the staff that you just talked about that's up there today is secure and safe, and that the area is protected. Obviously the terrorist threat has heightened just in the last few days, as you point out, the situation in Afghanistan with the Taliban returning to power, and the way that our exit has happened. I think that certainly our terrorist enemies are emboldened. Now, this may not be a terror event at all. We don't know for sure, but if it is a terrorist threat event, we do have a heightened threat coming from overseas, and the domestic terror threat since the horrific events of January 6th has remained high. And so the Capitol Police are very much on alert. They're looking out for this thing. We've seen a couple of small sort of incidents take place over the last few months at the Capitol. Luckily, nothing too terrible, with the exception of the officer, obviously, that was killed in that one incident, which obviously is horrific. But look, I think the key here is ensuring that the staff up there is safe, that the buildings are secured, and that the situation is resolved as quickly as possible.
Hey, this is Tom Fitzgerald. I wanted to ask you, from a national security standpoint or a domestic security standpoint, at the end of the day, is it more difficult to deal with the probability of the actions of individuals who may be acting on their own, Jamil, or whether or not you're dealing with an organized domestic terror situation? We do not know that that is the case this morning, or an international terrorist situation, and we do not know that that is the case this morning. But I have heard chatter repeatedly from Homeland Security and law enforcement officials that I have spoken to that the complexity of what they're dealing right now is multiplied because they have so many individuals that they just do not have on their radar screen who might act out in a way that might cause the same response to any of those other groups we just talked about.
Absolutely. I think from a trying to stop an event from happening, an individual who acts alone is much harder, as we learned in the case of the Unabomber, than an organized group. The organized group has connections, they have communications. There's more places you might catch them working with one another. So an individual is much harder to deal with. At the same time, an organized group obviously can have a much larger impact. You just look at what happened on 9/11. There are 19 hijackers, a large logistics tail, obviously able to kill nearly 3,000 Americans in sort of a brief few-hour time span on American soil. But with the Unabomber, you saw over the course of more than a decade, this individual bombing targets, and very hard to catch because it's one person. So I do think you're right that it is a much more complex situation because today we have both terrorist groups and people who are inspired by those terrorist groups. One of the things the FBI has talked a lot about recently is this feature of terrorist groups recruiting people online, motivating them to ideology, and then moving those communications into secure channels, encrypted channels, WhatsApp, and the like, where these companies that put together encrypted messaging, encrypted communications to protect our privacy and security. At the same time, we're now seeing terrorists and other organized groups inspire people and then move their communications to get them to actually do stuff to places where the FBI and other law enforcement agencies don't have access. That's a real concern.
And when you talk about inspiration for these types of incidents, one of the inspirations that unfortunately some people have acted upon is an environment of conspiracy right now, that some people are believing anything and everything. Talk about that for a moment, and how unpredictable does it make it for you folks in law enforcement who are analysts and experts in all of this to be able to put some type of fence around what we are expecting right now?
Yeah, no, look, the conspiracy-minded situation that's taken place over the last few months and maybe a year or two here in our country is hugely problematic because it allows people to be motivated by ideologies that don't even have any foothold in reality, right? We may be disgusted by the ideology of white supremacists or the ideology of Al-Qaeda and terrorists who want to attack Americans and kill, Christians and members that are not people of their faith or even people of their own faith who don't agree with their ultra conservative or ultra strict interpretation, right? Those things, at least, we may have huge problems, but we can understand them. We can understand what motivates those people. People who are motivated by conspiracy theories that aren't based in any reality, right, are much harder to figure out how do you get at those people? How do you identify them, and how do you prevent them from being deluded by these false narratives? So I think that's a huge, psychological part of the challenge that we have not yet grappled with, and really watching it spread to, it's really spread out. You normally think of sort of conspiracy-minded folks in sort of a particular cluster, right, where you might find them. These conspiracy theories that we've seen over the last few weeks, months, and years really have spread to a broad portion, a surprisingly large and broad portion, diverse portion of the American public, and it's very troubling. The other thing to know about these conspiracy theories, right, is that a lot of what's underlying them is also motivated and moved by nation-state behavior. So we've seen the Russians in particular, but also the Chinese, playing into some of these conspiracy-minded situations, not necessarily creating them, but playing into them and amplifying them in an effort to create more discord and dissension in our country. That's itself a huge problem, because now you've got a combination of these domestic conspiracy theories combining with foreign influence, really creating a powder keg of potential problems for our country.
Jamil, Marissa Mitchell here. You talk about how complex this situation is, and we were here talking about just the weight of the emotion and even the psyche that law enforcement are dealing with just within the last year when it comes to real threats as well as the conspiracy theories that you mentioned. How are members of law enforcement, from your perspective, holding up? Because for me, at least, these images are quite scary to see all over again.
Yeah, no, Marissa, it's got to be deeply concerning for our law enforcement folks. They are on the front lines of these battles. As you think about it, we talk about first line responders in the healthcare scenarios we've seen over the last year and the heroic efforts they have undertaken to keep Americans safe from the pandemic of COVID-19. But we oftentimes forget and sort of look past the police and law enforcement folks to Homeland Security, our military officers and enlisted members who are literally on the front lines of potential threats to their lives every day. So as you watch a lockdown like this, and we're all worried about the Capitol Hill staff that are up there. I used to be a staffer both on the House side there, as those pictures that you're showing, but also on the Senate side. And I feel for those individuals. We also have to remember that right now, walking around trying to identify where this bomb might be, who might be involved, and the like, are actual law enforcement officers, and their lives are even more at risk, because as they've gotten these other people to safety, they're still in that hot zone. And so I think, as we watch these scenes, and as they watch these scenes, I think they obviously have cause to be concerned and troubled. But as we watch these scenes, we should be thinking about the law enforcement men and women who are there on the front lines. Our men and women in Afghanistan today, the 7,000 troops who are at that airbase at Hamid Karzai Airport, who are helping get people out, right? I mean, they're the ones who are lives on the line every day. And so they're protecting American citizens in Afghanistan, American citizens and the like on Capitol Hill. They're the ones putting their lives at risk, and we owe them a debt of gratitude and a huge amount of respect. And so when you see that law enforcement officer on the street or that military officer on that airplane, just give them a thank you for your service. And that alone, I think, will keep them motivated to do the job that keeps us all safe.
All right, Jamil, this is Wisdom here. We know that this is the nation's capital. It's different than any other city in the country because of what goes on here. And you talked about the law enforcement. Go through the process and we get, there are threats. Everybody up here knows that they get threats all the time. But when this goes out to them, to the Capitol Police, since they're in charge, talk about the process of how this works. So the Capitol Police get the alert, how they coordinate with everybody else, how they go through the clearing process. Get into detail about that just a little.
It's a great question, because as you point out, the federal district is a very unique entity with a huge number of law enforcement entities, huge number of military and federal agencies, all who have joint jurisdiction in this area. When it comes to the Capitol complex, the people in charge of the immediate response of the Capitol Police, as you correctly point out, overseeing them are the sergeant at arms of the relevant houses of the House and the Senate. They coordinate very directly on the protection of the Capitol writ large. And the Capitol Police are there to serve and protect that portion. They obviously are working closely with Metropolitan D.C. Police also, who guard the area immediately outside the Capitol complex itself. Of course, the Federal Bureau of Investigations in any investigation of a terrorist threat or a potential bomb or the like is oftentimes brought in, as will be the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. So a lot of law enforcement agencies probably descending on this scene. They have established protocols and procedures about who's in charge and who's directing traffic. But you'll see a convergence of that. And then, of course, if the situation gets out of hand, as we saw on January 6th, there is the ability with the D.C. National Guard to be federalized and brought to bear on the problem, as well as a whole slew of other law enforcement agencies in the area. But the primary ones I'd be looking at right now today, Capitol Police, Metro D.C. Police, the Bureau, and ATF. Those are the main ones. Now, as far as clearing the buildings, what you typically have, and again, it's been a while since I've been up on Capitol Hill, but when I was up there, the way this played out was an alarm and announcement go out. There are phone, cell phone, and email announcements that go out. The Capitol complex is on lockdown. You're either told to shelter in place or move to safe locations. There are practice drills. It's kind of like if you remember when you were in school, in high school or elementary school, you'd have these locations where you would go. So every office has a place they go on the compound, which is away from other buildings in case it's like an earthquake or the like. And that way you're safe and they know where to check you out. In your office, each person has a roster of who's in the office. They have sort of I kid you not, a vest you put on, that demonstrates you're the emergency disaster coordination person. You take everybody out, make sure they get to safety. You do a check to see who's there and who's not accounted for. And then you report that up, and that all gets fed into the command center that's been established by the Capitol Police to ensure that everyone is safe and secure. And then they'll literally, where the threat is, they'll go door to door. And as I mentioned, the role of these law enforcement officers and the sacrifice they're putting on the line, they'll go door to door where the bomb might be and figure out, or where the threat might be, to figure out, is there a person, is there a device, do we need to bring in bomb squad dogs and the like to figure out what's happening there, a robot or the like, to detonate whatever device there may be. If in fact there is a device, we don't know again for sure what exactly is happening right now.
Okay, Jamil Jaffer, Executive Director of the National Security Institute. Always great having you on, and certainly appreciate your insight, especially with situations like this. Well, we'll bring you back on if we see anything new develop, but thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.
All right, we want to send it back out